Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome to a man coming in all the way from Dallas, Texas. And full disclosure, we know each other. We've worked together. Mr. Stephen Oommen, the great man from Texas. How are you, my friend?
I am wonderful. Are we gonna let everyone in on why we have the giggles? Because we know how we actually met.
Yes. Full disclosure, we both did some work in Vegas for a great organization called Growth Matters International, running or helping to run the Adobe Sales Leader Conference in Vegas, which was phenomenal. But our first face-to-face interaction was in the lobby of the Park MGM Hotel, and I think it was Tony Cross, who was the CEO of GMI, who said, "Oh, and Darren does a podcast," and I think you asked me what was the name of it, and I told you, and you said, and you can continue the story.
I look at Darren, he goes, "Yeah, I run the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast, right?" And so I look at Darren, I go, "Wait, you're Darren Mitchell?" And he looks at me, he goes, "Wait, you listen to my podcast?" I'm like, "No, I've never heard of it." Every one of us just started cracking up laughing because I got Darren good with that one. It was the funniest look on his face because he went from pure excitement
That's
to
it.
"you mother."
That's it. And here's the thing, right? Because the podcast is global, and I'm just thinking, wow, I've actually found somebody who's listened to it rather than just an innocent person. You have no idea who they are.
Oh, it was so worth it. But we became kindred spirits and connected right away because one of two things was going to happen. Either you were going to really get mad and hate me, and then we know, hey, right away. But if you can handle that, then we're going to end up being thick as thieves.
Absolutely. And the thing about Aussies in particular is we've got a pretty good dry sense of humor, and we can appreciate anecdotal stuff like that, which is fantastic. Now, fast forward a month, and guess what? You are on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Yeah, I was actually going to go look up the actual definition of exceptional because does it mean positive or negative? Because technically an exception to anything. And I was like, wait a minute, maybe he's setting me up because technically, Stephen, you're exceptional.
No, I like to think about this in the positive sense that exceptional is, high level, above,
Yeah.
certainly above ordinary, and certainly above great. So I wanted to separate that from just every other podcast on the planet. So great to have you on the podcast, my friend. You have a very distinguished career, and in many different organizations, having spent a number of years at Microsoft, but you've also been in finance, and you now go to market expert. So you're also going to be I didn't ask you this before we press record. Is this going to be your first book?
Yeah, it will
Yeah.
be the
So
first book. I've got about three that are planned in the series that all tie together. And then I'll have a few more after that that are sort of just different topics that I'm passionate about. That's the
yeah,
plan.
cool. Love it. So I do want to talk about, I guess, the first book that comes out. We might delve into the other ones in terms of some of the concepts. But I think the first one that's going to be titled The Chameleon Effect or something similar to that is really well worth delving into, particularly from a sales leadership perspective.
Yeah.
Before we jump into that, I'd love you to give our listeners just a bit of background on the Stephen Oommen story,
Yeah.
in terms of, what you've done, what you've achieved, and specifically what led you to do what you do today.
Oh, I love it. I appreciate that. First and foremost, as always, thank you for having me, Darren. I would say when I think about leadership, I was sort of thrust into it Or maybe I was thrust into it because I didn't know what I was doing, because I started a company very early on in my 20s. And once it starts to take off and you need more people, that's actually how I had to learn, just by doing it, by being
Yeah.
the CEO of my own company. And the truth of the matter is, you live and you learn. And from there, done a lot of things, gone up and down in my life, and it's very interesting once you've had a lot of hard knocks and you. I don't think anybody really has a linear path, although some people try to act like they do. But when you've really hit the sky and come all the way back down to earth, that level of peaks and valleys, it's the worst feeling, but it's the greatest learning. And you
Yeah.
tend to mellow out as you get older. And you realize one thing about leadership: there is no such thing, in my opinion. Well, maybe there is, but I was going to say there's no such thing as good or bad or right or wrong leadership. But what I really mean by that is the style that you need to be productive and to produce productivity, right?
Mm.
And so it kind of ties into the chameleon effect. And really what I've learned since then, after being a leader at Microsoft, being a leader at other tech companies, small companies, big companies, mid companies, is that, and we'll dive into the concepts of the chameleon effect, but even that word chameleon is,
Yeah.
every single human you lead is going to be different.
Mm.
So just by the nature of that, how can you lead everyone the same? So people will title things servant leadership and,
Mm.
dictatorial leadership and this, so some, and again, they'll put positive or negative sentiment around it. But at the end of the day, what's the outcome you're trying to produce? What's
Mm.
the feeling that you're trying to produce? And if you're getting the intended result, it's probably the right type of leadership in that moment
Mm.
if you're getting the result you want.
Yeah.
I would say if you're getting results that most people would deem like negative, you probably might be chemically imbalanced. But there are some, knuckleheads on the planet. But as a general rule, I think most people would say, I want my people to have positive feelings. I want them to get promoted in life, and I want to have positive results, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and if you're getting that, then keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when you look at your, I guess, the trajectory of the career, and as you were talking about some of the highs and also some of the lows, it reminded me, I'm not sure who was saying it, so I'm not going to know who to attribute it to, but the importance of being an authentic human being. And I know that you do a lot of work on building meaningful relationships because, I mean, you've got a pretty good following on LinkedIn and you talk a little bit about the fact that you can have a wide relationship or a wide network, but how deep is it?
Mhm.
And how important is it to be able to treat people on the way up? Because often coming down, they're the ones that are going to be either helping you accelerate down or maybe supporting you on the way down. So, from the perspective of the relationships that you build, how important is that from a leadership point of view?
Oh, wow. That is one, very wise that you picked up on that. But I actually think it's a life principle as well as a leadership principle, as well as a sales principle. It's in all areas. And I'll give you an
Mm.
example. Let's turn it to sales, right? Most people will tell sellers, start at the top, start at the top. Great advice. If you can get there, great.
Yeah,
But so many sellers don't think about the value of the entire organization as you talk about going, on the way up.
yeah,
The truth of the matter is every human has value. And
mm,
if you have the concept and you think like that, all of a sudden everything's opened up for you, right?
yeah,
So as you think about, as a seller, you're trying to break into a company, if you're in B2B or even if you're in B2C, right?
yeah,
Speak to anyone and everyone that you possibly can. Again, there's limits in time because you don't know when they're going to be the influencer. Maybe they'll move into leadership, right? But if they're
yeah,
giving you information, you don't know how much influence they have in the organization. There's so much to it, right?
mm,
But that's just the outcome. And the point is not to be manipulative. I'm just saying that good leadership, good thoughts, the way you're talking about, produces good fruit.
yeah,
Who doesn't want to produce good fruit? So, when it comes to the leadership side of things, I think it also creates an input into yourself where the learning that happens on the way up, on the way down, it actually just makes you a better leader,
Mm.
um, because you know how to communicate with a diverse range of individuals, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, when you say, like, one of the things that I'm doing this year specifically is I'm so tired of people coming to me saying, Stephen, can you introduce me to so and so? You're first connected to them. And I have to say, I actually don't really know them. And that
Yeah.
actually bothers me.
Yeah.
Now, again, there's only so much time in life. But what I'm trying to do is actually, over time, just meet as many of my first connections as possible. And guess what? If I only meet them one time, I don't know, 10 years from now, something may come up, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, can we go a mile deep with everyone? Probably not. But for me, at least I want to make the effort.
Mm.
And that's the key for me.
Yeah.
So yes, casting a wide net. I just don't want to have the intention of only going an inch deep. At least make the effort.
Well, it's a good point you make. And I was, as you're talking, I'm reflecting on the people I've interviewed on this podcast, and some of them have been a connection for a while on LinkedIn. And the podcast has been the only real opportunity. I've had an opportunity to do a face-to-face conversation. And yeah, we talk about sales, we talk about leadership, which is fantastic. But you just don't know where it's going to lead to post that, right? Now, a classic
Mhm.
example is what brought you and I together in Vegas was as a result of a podcast conversation that happened back in August
That's
that then was
so
a
true.
conversation after that, right? So if I hadn't have had that conversation and I didn't know of Alan at that time,
Mhm.
but we had a great conversation on the podcast. We started talking afterwards, so we started to build that familiarity and the connection, which also happened through the podcast itself. And all of a sudden, where we are is where we were in Vegas, right? It's just, but that came from a connection.
I didn't even know that story actually.
Yeah.
When you were starting to say about the podcast, I thought you were, and you might not even know this. The way that I met Tony was because Tony was on someone else's podcast and I heard him and reached out to him. So I didn't even, that's not even the story you were referencing just now. So
No,
I actually didn't know the story about how you met Alan, but that's just very
that's it.
fascinating because I met Tony through a connection and that connection had him on his podcast.
Yeah,
That is fascinating to me.
it is. And what that tells me is whether you're in sales or in leadership, whether you're doing a podcast, whether you're running your own business, it's to always be connected, but always look for opportunities to build a deeper connection, but also to add value as much as you can to those connections, not to look for what you can get from those connections.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I had to learn this over my career because sometimes you look at someone and you judge a book by its cover. And I'm
Yeah.
trying my best because time is limited to just be open, right?
Mm.
With these things called no agenda meetings.
Yeah.
And I think when I was more younger, like in my 20s, I was always trying to get something. And so you kind of look and size people up and is it worth my time and who do I want to get to know? But I promise you, what I have found is that if, in my opinion, just meet everybody if you possibly can.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what the best analogy is because we're talking about humans. I was going to use something about turn over every rock or something of that nature. But my whole point is because you don't know who's who, the value that you get from the diversity, I mean, it actually helps your own intellect.
Mm.
I call it wealth, right? Because wealth is more than currency.
Yeah.
Um, but what I also say about these no agenda meetings and why this chameleon effect, it's part of this whole thing is um, we are taught as leaders, especially leaders, and we even teach it like we were teaching this in Vegas together.
Mm.
You have to block your time. You have to focus. We are taught like crazy as leaders, and I think as a human race, focus, 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 focus.
Yeah.
And there is a time and a place for that, and probably majority of your work life should have a little bit of focus.
Yeah.
But because of that, I think people tend to forget that part of life is to literally be free. So I want people who are listening to think about this. I'm going to say something that's probably very provocative and may not make sense when I first say it. focus stifles creativity. Focus stifles creativity. Well, what the heck are you talking about? My reference to that is focus means you have barriers.
Mm.
Like that's literally why you focus. You put barriers, you put limits. Well, if
Yep.
you put barriers, limits, and an agenda to something, you have already put that like a barrier to any creativity around that. But I have found that if you segment a portion of your day, a portion of your time, a portion of your week, a portion of your meetings to literally just show up and get to know people, and
Yeah.
I'm specifically talking now about networking, getting to know people,
Yeah.
the most brilliant ideas come from that. My third book actually stemmed from a meeting 2 days ago. I just went and met with someone. We got to talking. I was able to come up with an entire outline of a book just from a random thought in a conversation.
Yeah.
And boom, I have the third book in my series.
Because if you were focused, you would have been probably closed off to the possibility, and you wouldn't have seen it because you would be so
Yeah.
focused on what your agenda was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as leaders, especially when I think of being an exceptional leader, even with our people, how many times do we say you have to show up with an agenda? And that's fine. Like there are
Yeah.
moments and there are times for that. I'm just saying don't be
Yeah.
so closed off to have no agenda meetings just to talk and see how somebody's doing and make that part of your ritual. That is a tactic or something I think of an exceptional leader is
Yeah.
someone who's open to that type of relationship with their people.
I think it's a really good point, Stephen, because and what I want people to understand from this conversation is we're not saying that every single meeting should have no agenda, right? Because there
Correct.
will be meetings where you do have to have an agenda because there's stuff we have to get done. But as a leader, what is your key responsibility? Well, it's to develop your people to drive the number, but it's also to give yourself time and space to reflect so you can be creative, which means that you've almost got to be present with your people. And I say this all the time to leaders that their greatest gift that they can give their people is the gift of their attention to their people, which
Yeah.
means you can't have an agenda. You've got to be open and curious and ready to serve them, ready to listen to them. And that's where gold can come out of it. So what you're doing in the space now in terms of your focus this year is to meet as many people as you can in your network face to face. And this is another example of that,
Yeah.
where there's no specific agenda, but out of it, who knows what's going to come.
Spot on. In the workforce, I want to be very clear. You are spot on. I think the majority of the meetings should have an agenda. So if anyone's listening to this, I'm just going to throw out a percentage of no agenda meetings. I would say somewhere in the 5% range is what I think of.
Yeah,
My whole sentiment or point of bringing this up is don't make it 0%
yeah,
because, and we are, just seem to over pivot as leaders to boom, 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 boom. We have a very specific agenda. So
yeah,
leave just a little bit of space, if anything, and you'll see what comes from it.
absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about the catalyst for you. I mean, you spent a number of years at Microsoft leading a big business unit there. Um, was there a catalyst? Was there something? Because I know you've recently put out a post that talked about, I think it was called the entreployee.
Yeah, the entreployee. I wrote that article a couple of years ago. I need to keep updating it because to give people more context. But tell me more. What's the question
Well,
around?
I just saw it on your profile, and I was just curious in terms of I guess the context of that,
Yeah.
but really being because I know a lot of people, me included, that has made the move from being an employee in a large organization with responsibility, and all of a sudden you're no longer there because you're doing your own thing. And
Mhm.
this thing, as I'm holding up my smartphone, used to ring multiple times a day, and then all of a sudden you're no longer part of the corporate, and you're thinking, have people lost my number? It ain't ringing.
Yeah.
So, was there a catalyst for you to make that transition from a senior leader within Microsoft to what you're doing today?
Yeah. Let me first explain what an entreployee is and kind of the context behind it, because it's also part of the chameleon effect, right? Because you have to be able to adapt and be flexible and show up to the market in the way the market needs, right?
Mm,
But so many times people pit on entrepreneurs versus employees. And it's one side or the other. It's, oh, if you're an employee, you're risk averse, you can't do anything, blah, blah, blah. If you're an entrepreneur, they sometimes get glorified, but then it's the grind and all these different things. My personal theory and what I have observed, right? I don't have like psychological evidence. I haven't done a research study, but guess what? I have eyes and ears, and
Yeah.
I've lived life long enough to have a statistical sampling that every human being probably falls. Sorry, I said that wrong. Most human beings fall into the category that they have both sides of the equation in them. They're both have entrepreneurial traits and employee habits and traits as well.
Yeah.
Very few people. Now, if you look at a Venn diagram, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, look at it, there's a Venn diagram in there where most people view that you're either, there's a large segment of people who are entrepreneurs, some are employees, and very few are in between, right?
Yeah.
What I've seen is probably 2% of people are true entrepreneurs that don't have employee traits in them. They just
Mm.
can't be an employee because it's not their makeup. Probably
Yeah.
2%. And
Yeah.
only 2% of the world are truly employees that have no entrepreneurial nature, spirit, or talents within them.
Mm.
Now, here's the thing. I actually think circumstances of life dictate where you're going to be. So if you have an entrepreneurial desire, but your circumstances that don't allow you for whatever reason, it could be time, it could be money, it could be, support, whatever, doesn't
Yeah.
allow you to go start a business, find a corporation, find a job that allows you to exhibit your entrepreneurial traits. A lot of
Mm.
sellers, that's why they get into sales. A lot
Exactly.
of leaders, right? Don't. So I happen to be like Microsoft. One of the reasons I actually left an entrepreneurial venture to go to Microsoft in reality, because they had this sort of startup feel of a new division they were being in. And honestly, once I got there, they knew my background. That's one
Yeah.
reason I think I got hired. Actually, it's one reason I know I got hired. And they sort of left me alone and said, go do it.
Okay.
Do whatever you need to do. And so I had this entrepreneurial drive in the confines of a very well funded new venture that they were building, right? And then I
Yeah.
started doing very well there because of that, right? Now, I've started a company, several companies that have failed in my 20s and had one or two, actually, really two big successes in my 20s. So I've had the full entrepreneurial experience. I've had the full employee experience. I've done both, right?
Yeah.
So to me, you can also do both at the same time. That's the other aspect of it, right? You can exhibit your entrepreneurial endeavors in a company, but a lot of people have a side hustle.
Yeah.
They make money in multiple different areas.
Mm.
So the whole point is when you piece together revenue in your life, there's multiple ways to do it. Just don't limit yourself. It goes back to like the no agenda meetings, right? And
Yeah.
so part of leaving wasn't actually anything to do with, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to do this. Um, I just happened to get a call. Somebody was looking. I left from Microsoft, and then for me, I kind of left the corporate world for now. And I always say for now because I'm open to, you never know what's going to happen. I actually get
Yeah.
calls fairly often, people saying, "Hey, I know you're not looking, but can you?" And I'm like, and I haven't found it. There's only about two or three things that might tickle my fancy, but here's kind of the point. Like for me, it was family.
Yeah.
I needed the time to spend with my young kids, and I just happened to be in a position where I was able to do that. So I've taken the last 5 to 6 months, but again, because I've exhibited the entrepreneurial experience and I built my network,
Yeah.
my revenue actually, I've been generating, like, I haven't even changed my profile yet,
Mm.
but I'm still generating revenue now because people are just calling me up and I don't have any product or service on LinkedIn. And this is why the network is
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah. Well, they do say, don't they, Stephen, that your network will often determine your net worth. And that's not just in a financial sense, it's in a lot of other different ways as well. So if you think about, and I was talking to somebody this morning actually about the fact that they had not, in their entire career, had never gone through a an official interview process per se, where they had applied for a role. Every role, and they've been in different roles for the last 25, 30 years. Every role they went to was as a result of I guess, the unofficial job market, which was through their network. And it might have been through LinkedIn, but it was through the network that they'd built up over time to the
Yeah.
point where, you know what, the winds actually, the people get wind of what's going on. Oh, are you looking? Yeah, maybe not, but let's have a conversation. No agenda. One thing leads to another, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a different business doing a different thing.
Literally, that happened to me a week and a half ago. A gentleman calls me up. He's like, "Hey, um, so and so said to give you a call. He already told me that you're not looking, but hey, he said that you know, and it was somebody I had actually known. So the person that called me knew me,
Yeah,
but he was never going to call me because he was like, I know this guy's not looking because
yeah,
I'm post on LinkedIn. He knew I was kind of semi-retired and whatnot, but he said, he took a shot, and it was interesting.
yeah,
I'm open to a conversation, but
yeah.
I'm not looking. I wasn't
Mm,
looking for anything. And the crazy thing that I think about is I have a lot of empathy because we are in an economy where people are struggling. And what I find is the people that seem to raise up outside of a current economy are like people say it all the time. It's, oh, that person has connections.
mm,
And so that's why I want to teach this skill so badly and get the world to understand how to make connections
yeah.
in using the formula that I talk about, which is network, connect, relationships. And today I wrote something which is the fourth step, which is a personal thing for me, which is the bond,
Hmm.
which is actually the true, like, we're brothers, we're sisters, we're whatever terminology you want to call it.
Yeah,
But what happened, and the reason I've still been able to generate revenue is I literally continue to network and I just share people with people what my passions are and what I love to do. What do I want to do
yeah,
with my life?
yeah.
Not selling anything because I don't have it. And here's actually how I ended up on stage in Vegas. I think it was after I left in August, I finally had freed up some time. And I literally just told people, I was like, I know what I want to do because I've done this before. I want to get back on stage speaking because there's only three things I do better than almost anyone else in life. And I was just very clear with myself about it. I'm like, and I go, I'm a freakishly good on stage public speaker. And I love it because I love moving an audience and seeing them shift in a
Hmm.
moment.
Yeah,
And honestly, I have this like otherworld experience. And so when I share that, the other two is coaching and leadership, which is, why we're here today, and then sales. But that first one, when I said it, boom, within 2 weeks, I had a contract. And then somebody was like, well, that's when Tony was like, dude, you should come to Vegas with us. I was like, had no idea he had anything, but just networking and putting your passions out there.
yeah.
Let God, the universe, what energy, whatever you want to call it,
That's
let
it.
it be, let it work for you,
That's it.
and let people work for you.
It is it's a great story, and I know uh he's passed on now, but Bob Proctor is somebody that I've been following for a number of years, and his teaching, and he's
Yeah.
phenomenal in terms of his wisdom, and probably he was of the same ilk as like Jim Rohn back in the day,
Mhm.
but he always used to say, "Let go and let God." Now, let go and let God doesn't necessarily mean you have to be religious in inverted commas, but essentially put things out there and don't attach any specific meaning to you have to get a certain outcome, but things will come to you.
Yeah.
So that's mindset, and it's what you're doing. You're paying things forward. You're actually serving. You're actually building relationships, and not on the superficial level, but you're building true connections. And who knows where it's going to lead? Because you
Yeah.
don't, right?
What's interesting is like even this month alone, because like again, remember, I have no product, no service of my own. Like I'm not like productizing or monetizing something, for myself. But this month I've got one, two, three, four, five massive brands that I'm going to their companies and speaking and training. And I haven't even started putting out there what I'm doing. And it is like proof. Like I want to be the person that if I'm going to write something, I'm living it.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I actually don't do a lot of, I think, advertising and, hey, look at me and do all this, because that is one style. But at
Mm.
least for this season, because I mean, it's still business. You should promote yourself. You should put
Yeah,
yourself out there.
absolutely.
But this season, I'm like, this is beyond, like, it's fascinating even to me. Um, like how fast it's happened in a short amount of time. So
Well, think about this from the context. So I want to get into the chameleon effect and maybe even identity crisis in the shadows, which is your
yeah,
forthcoming 3 book series, which
yep.
people need to get across it. If you think about the sales role, sales leadership role, and even back in the day when you're at Microsoft, sometimes sales people and sales leaders are under huge amounts of pressure to hit the number.
Hmm.
And we're talking about how to build networks, build genuine connections, build relationships, and then build the bond, right? Because people do business with those who they know, they like, and they trust, but also who they remember.
Yeah.
So in a sales context, people are going to be listening to this and saying, "Yeah, that's great, Darren. That's great, Stephen." But you don't understand, mate. I am so far behind my number. I'm getting absolutely ridden like a Texas
Yeah.
ro rodeo horse or bull. How do I do this in the quote unquote the real world?
In the real world. No, no, you're spot on. Because I live on Mars, I live on the moon, and you and I both like we don't live on this planet. It's not, you're right, it's not working for us, right? Now that's the facetious, cheeky, smart aleck response. But I absolutely understand it. And let's first diagnose the problem. When you, especially if you are funded by, VC back, PE back, things of that nature,
Yeah,
it's spreadsheet and it's math.
yeah.
And guess what? If you do 100 dials and you can get one opportunity, you can math that out. Now, if the problem is if you're listening on audio, you're not seeing what I'm doing with my hands, but essentially the way that I look at that front end when you think about pipeline and being around the number is there's efficient and then there's effective. And I actually don't even know that not building relationships is even efficient. So let's say you do 100 dials,
Yeah.
you can now math that out. Let's say you can get something in a week by doing that. Well, the problem is that opportunity might take, I'm totally making this up, 12 months to close.
Mm,
Took 1 week to generate an opportunity, 12 months to close. Let's say that's the general number metrics behind it. Again, I don't have some research project around it. I just have eyes, ears, and I've been around the block. My sense is it might take 3 weeks to generate an opportunity by networking, by finding people, by developing warm connections.
mm,
That same opportunity might take 3 weeks, but it might take six, but it should take closer to like 6 months to close. But what happens is it's very hard to track that because the truth of the matter is, what is all the sales training out there about? It's about how to do cold emails, how to do research, how to do your account plans, how to do all these things. And because what do people want? They want the little tactics.
yeah.
They don't want the how of how do I actually bring down somebody's walls because it's too ethereal, it's too what's the word, soft and things of that
And it's hard
nature,
to measure, right?
hard to measure. And I know we keep saying, throughout our management careers, it's like you can't manage what you don't measure. I think that's how it is, and like we come up with these sayings that sound great in theory, and they are.
Yeah.
I believe it's a yes and. All right, so that's the problem is because it's very hard to measure. Here's honestly what I would do, and it also depends on the size of the company, the brand.
Mm,
Okay. If you do not have a brand and it's hard for you to get in, right? If you don't have a Microsoft behind your name, you don't have an ADP, and I'm just using tech as an example, but let's say it's
yeah.
telecom like AT&T, Verizon, any big,
Yeah.
big company, then what I would do is keep your AEs doing some of the same things, but I would hire maybe 2 or 3 high level people because if anyone is sold in the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? I was in the 90s starting my sales career and all that before all the
Yeah.
tech came out. Think about the financial services, the insurance space. How would you hire someone? You would literally ask them about their portfolio, their
Mm,
Rolodex, the people they knew, because you're hiring their network and their
yeah.
current state of business to come with you, right? And I would hire a couple high level individuals, maybe some retired folks that have been sitting on boards, pay them really well to just that's all they are is business development to just walk
Yeah.
you into places. And instead of paying, let's say a 20 to 28-year-old with no network to just dial for dollars and annoy everybody, again, I let me be very clear. I don't think cold calling is dead. I don't think LinkedIn is dead. I don't think anything is dead.
Mm.
I just think there are things that people just aren't doing, and it's a yes and, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about the 24 to 28-year-old coming right out of college or whatnot, people are hiring, they're paying them what, 40 to 80,000 base salary probably to just do work, 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 and like
Yeah.
that's not fun. And it's not fun for the buyers either.
No, it's not.
So just at least find a few high level individuals that can pick up the phone and actually just walk you into places.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how I would personally start. And I would actually train SDRs. A buddy of mine, Mac Redden, he owns a company called Comsor. He developed a term called NDR, Network Development Rep, and hire maybe one or two people and just
Yeah.
train them only just to
On
network, network,
networking.
network, network, while you still have the rest of your field. That way, at least you're dipping your toe in the water
Yeah.
and you're not completely upending something, right? When you do something, test it, pilot it, and go at it that way. What do you think about that?
I think it's a good idea because, I mean, and it's as you were talking, I'm thinking, you know what, we live, no matter whether we're in Australia, whether in the US or the UK, we live in an instant gratification society, and we're told, go and buy this now, go and get this now. Don't worry about how you're going to pay for it, pay for that later. And so everything's speed, right? So we're saying, hey, we have to have speed to market. We need to try and close this deal as quickly as possible. And this is why you've got people under pressure to try and close what they possibly can when they can, when you've got a live customer. But if you want to have sustainability and reputation and know that sales is, first of all, the ultimate form of service, and often the sale doesn't start until after the first, second, or sometimes the third sale is made, you've got to be able to invest in those relationships because if you look at the lifetime value, you've got to be able to build that long-term credibility with those customers. So it's having the ability to, I guess, manage the short-term expectations from a business, do what's needed to be done at the tactical level without pissing your customers off to the point where they don't want to do business with you anymore, but also investing in the long-term strategies. You know what? We want these customers to love us and keep coming back to us. So we don't have to keep calling them every single day.
Yeah.
It's
You're,
as I
you're
and I
spot
agree, it's
on.
a bit of yes and.
It's the I know it's a global economy. I'm going to use a um, Asian analogy with the US, like the Western analogy, right? And so if you think about how business plans are made, typical Western business plans are made in 1, 2, 3, 5 year increments.
Mm,
But like Japanese business plans, the way that I understand them is they're 100-year business plans because
yeah,
they are looking at the long term and they're trying to think about how it will outlive them and for their generations and legacy. And it's just a different model, right? I think
yeah,
there's a blend of both. But if
yeah.
you hire a bunch of, let's say, people that are going to churn and burn, like what's going to happen when you don't make your number at the end of the year? Like you should, right? You're not going to make your number anyway. So I'm thinking to myself, like, why not invest a little bit in growing your network regardless? Because the other way we know and we proved it doesn't work as well, right?
That's
Just
it.
more numbers doesn't always mean everything. But there's something you said that I want to hit on. I don't know if there's actually an answer to this one, but scale, faster, bigger isn't always the best. Bigger is not always the best. And I'm from Texas, and they always say that, everything's bigger in Texas, right?
That's
It's
right.
not always good because here's the thing. You know what happens when you go too fast? Like with your tires, they burn out.
Mm, that's
Like
it.
the mechanics, everything of that nature. Scale isn't for everyone. And I
Mm,
understand we've got investors, everybody's looking to make a profit. And now this goes more philosophical, and this is not something that we can solve for, but how much is enough?
yeah, exactly.
And you can't keep putting all this AI and tech on people and say, do more, do more, do more, do more. We need to be more productive. Like, I'm sorry, our bodies, our brain, like,
Yeah.
so we build all this technology to help humans, to basically replace humans. I'm like, I can go off on that, but it's beyond maddening. And I'm like, this is leaders in today. Like we're all guilty. So that it's not like I'm standing on a soapbox. We've all done it. I'm just
Nah,
like,
absolutely.
for all the smart people in the world, we do some dumb things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think it's a case of, okay, we understand that we need we're here as a business, we're here as a sales leader, we're here as a sales professional to be quote unquote successful, whatever success looks like, whether that's hitting a number, having satisfaction, whatever the case might be. But you've also got to look at um, what is the mid to long term viability of this business looking like, and how do I best invest in giving myself every opportunity of being able to achieve that future state. And if you
Hmm.
think about what Simon Sinek talks about in terms of the infinite game, he's saying, well, you know what? Stop looking at just this quarter, or this month, or this year. Look at the bigger game, and the game evolves and changes, and the players might come in, but we're trying to improve the game as we go, which means we've got to invest. We've got to invest in people. We've got to invest in relationships.
Oh, that's so good. I love that book. Um, I mean, that was a mic drop moment for you right there, because that's exactly how it should be. I don't know that I even have a response to that because except yes, you're right.
Yes, all right. Love it. Love it. So Stephen, I'd love to sort of pivot now and talk about your I guess 2025. You put a LinkedIn post out I think last week from memory
Yeah,
or
last
earlier
week.
this week about the Chameleon Effect. A beautiful photo of a nice grey cardigan. I think did you bring that to Vegas?
I don't think I can't remember. No, I had something else. It is hilarious that I have gotten so many texts from friends and stuff that like about the sweater. And I'm like, did you read the post? They're like, what's up with that sweater? I thought it, I mean, one, it's an expensive sweater, I'm sorry to say, but I was like, I think it's a good looking sweater. And I don't know if it's Mr. Rogers or not, but some people liked it. Some people said you need to burn it. I'm like, oops.
Mate, as long as you're comfortable in it, and more importantly, as long as Stacy likes you in it, mate, who cares?
That's the point. I was like, I was comfortable in it till I received all those texts.
Love it, love it. So I'd love to, I know, without giving away all the IP, because we do want people to buy the book when it's out. But can you talk just at a conceptual level in terms of the premise of the book and what it's designed to help with?
Yeah. And honestly, I don't mind giving away things for free at the end of the day. The whole purpose of the book is to help. So I do hope people buy it when it comes out, but it'll probably be about a year as it goes. So I'll start to drop things on LinkedIn and articles and posts so everyone has it. And then obviously it'll be aggregated into the book. But here's the basic premise of the book, and I'll give the background for it. The basic premise of the book is that while some people say we can't be all things to all people, I truly believe that we can be something for everyone
Yeah.
because we all have connections, we all have commonalities, and there's been a lot of books written on that. But here's kind of the basic difference or the unique differentiator of the chameleon effect. It actually is based on the fact that most people, when they show up to a conversation and they're trying to connect with someone, they actually do make it about themselves and they make themselves the hero in the story and try to find something in the other person that like is connecting with them,
Yeah.
or but they do it from an themselves perspective. Like if I like basketball, I'm going to find out, hey, do you like sports, do you like this? And it's that's really about me. But the truth of the matter is, as you hear someone speak, you have to actually turn into them, so to
Mm,
speak.
mm,
And this idea of being a chameleon was used to be a defensive term. And what I'm trying to make a pattern interrupt or change the terminology is that what a chameleon actually does is they show up in their environment, they look around, and they become one with their environment. That's why there's certain people on this planet that can go literally anywhere, any culture, anywhere, and fit in
yeah.
and have a great conversation. And people are like, wow, they have a very diverse network, but they seem to get along with everyone. And
Mm,
here's the backstory for those that might be hearing this the first time. So if you're on audio, you can't see what I look like. But I'm going to share something and it's going to sound provocative, but stay with me so I can help you understand. I'm a bald headed, dark skinned man with a very edged up beard, right? So I'm going to back up to where the chameleon effect actually took place, and I was able to articulate this. In one of my first tech interviews and the first tech job that I received, it was in a time where we didn't do Zoom calls, there was no video calls, but I was trying to get the job. I was doing some studying. I knew they were going to ask the question, what is your unique differentiator, right? That's a very general interview question. And I had
Yeah.
no idea. I had never been in tech sales before. And so I came up with this off the wall answer. I actually don't even remember how I came up with this. But after getting the initial screening done, they call me into the office for an interview. I walk in, I sit down. Halfway through the interview, they ask this question. And at that time, I had a full head of hair, and it's like long and loopy curls as it gets longer, things of that, so if you can kind of imagine that. And I look at them and I say, my answer to them when they said, "What's your unique differentiator?" I go, "I'm the world's best chameleon." They're like, "Huh? What does that mean?" I said, "Let me explain." And I go, "I guarantee you, when you spoke to me over the phone, you probably thought I was a white male." And I might
Mm.
have said Caucasian male. I don't remember which
Yeah.
term I used. And I
Yeah.
said, because of my diction, and let me be very clear, I did go, I went to broadcasting school. I was trying to be a sports broadcaster, but essentially I flattened my accent. I was born and raised in Oklahoma in the South. I had a very Southern accent, I think, when I was very young, and eventually it flattened out. But I'm a dark skinned man walking in, and I said, and when I walked in, you probably looked at me and was like, huh, that's not what we expected. You probably thought I was an African American male. And
Yeah.
now what's hilarious is when I first said, like, you probably thought I was a white man, you just saw their eyebrows rise up and they were like, okay, where's HR? Or are we getting punked? Like, are we about to go to, get in trouble? And that wasn't my point. But what I explained to them is my heritage was actually from India. I was first generation in the States. My parents immigrated, but I just happened to have a look that growing up, most people thought I was African American. But when you hear me and all these different things, so I proceeded to explain to them that, selling into IT in the States specifically, there's a high demographic of Indians in IT. But one reason I'm really good over the phone in cold calling is because of my diction, my voice. I can pretty much get in anywhere. But also because of the way I look, I can hang with a lot of different minorities because that's also my circle, whether, Hispanics, African American, just anywhere you go, I
Yeah.
seem to be able to fit in because I've experienced a lot of cultures. I've been mistaken for a lot of different identities, racial identities, different things of that nature. I even was talking about a little bit about the gender aspect of it because I'm the only son and I grew up, mom. My dad was obviously there too, but essentially the sisters and everything of that nature. So there's a lot of understanding I had growing up. So there's my final point was there is not a room that I cannot walk in that I don't feel comfortable at this
Yeah.
stage in my life because of this. And I actually know enough about the eastern side of the world, the western side of the world. It doesn't matter where you're at. By the end of it, it was hilarious watching their faces because they just kind of were all sitting back, eyes wide, and they go, "That is the best answer, craziest, but the best answer we have ever heard." And so by going through that experience and understanding that what the chameleon actually does is it's not an inwardly focused conversation, it truly
Mm.
is outwardly focused. Where that, and let me be very clear because people ask, well, how did you get to that stage? And here later in the conversation, I'll tell you about the childhood because it was not all cupcakes and ding dongs, and there was
Mm.
some very hard times because of this growing up. But essentially, the whole point is this: when somebody speaks, look into them and find something that just sparks your passion,
Mm.
ignites your passion, and become one with them. Don't try to make them one with you.
Yeah.
Become one with them. And it goes back to these no agenda meetings. That's where the creativity comes from. And just like in our financial portfolio, they say diversity, like in your portfolio, diversity in your network, diversity in your thought. That's where real wealth is derived from. And
Yeah.
yes, money wise, but I'm actually talking about wealth in terms of life, thought, success, health, joy. All of that comes
Mm.
from a diversity of understanding.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it comes through people.
It's a great description, and I fully appreciate and concur with it because when you think about the vast majority of people when they're out there networking, they often, and you go to these networking events, and it's all sort of pre-arranged, preordained. There's a certain formula that's supposed to follow, quote unquote. A lot of it is self-indulgent because I want to talk to you about me. How do I impress you? How do I make you like me? Versus, as you rightly say, a chameleon is a person that can go into any environment and feel comfortable about engaging with the environment and become one with the environment because they're focused on the others in the environment. And as Stephen Covey always used to say, they become interested in others, and through that process, and it has to be genuine. This is not faking it so you can get something from them. So that's manipulation. It's, hey, I'm genuinely interested in you. Tell me more about you. You become interesting to those people. That's what a chameleon does.
And that's why the book is actually split into three different parts, not the series, but just the first book, where everybody wants to know the tactics, the how. But I
Mm,
promise you, if you do some of the things that I would tell you to do or that I do, because I'm not going to tell people in the book what to do,
mm,
I'm going to share with them the tactics that I've observed that happen because of where my heart is and where my mindset is. And people, I'm going to teach people how to find their own way to
mm.
observe and consistently have repeatable tactics. And I'll give an example here in a second. But essentially, the first part of the book is to really understand the mindset, the heart, and to discover your own story, because if you understand your own story, then you can go to the second part to understand the world and the external
Mm.
factors, because you go internal, external, and then you work on the tactics, right?
Yeah.
Last week, I gave an example of something I do with a lot of males, right? And I call them brother a lot. And I will do this little tactic where I'm like, oh, you're the older brother, you're paying for dinner. And there's different weird things that if all I did was say, hey, I call everybody brother and it creates a connection, you'd be like, that's kind of weird. But if you understand the heart behind what's happened in my life and that I grew up with no brothers and I was yearning for these things, there's congruency in my words with the way my face shows up. Like it's not cringy because you can tell that I'm authentic. And what happens is if you, and I say this, I wrote this last week, but this will be in the book, is if you mimic actions or you try to emulate tactics or actions without understanding or having observed the the intention,
Yeah.
that equals manipulation.
100%.
So copying tactics, copying, actions without observing and understanding intention, that's manipulation.
Mm.
But if you don't want to manipulate, you have to actually understand the intention and lead with the right intention, because then out of that comes the right actions. And that way you don't copy someone else's actions.
Yeah.
You actually create your own tactics. And that's what makes you unique. But most people keep saying, what's the right words? What's like when I write emails, there's things that I can get away with in emails because of who I am.
Yeah.
And there's just something about it, it comes through in those words, right?
Absolutely.
And no one's teaching people to create their own. Everyone's teaching people, look at my framework, look at my thing. And some of that's good. Do not get me wrong. Like we need some of that.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not you. Right.
No. No.
So there's probability, there's, all these things of frameworks, and that's why we do it. But we really got to help people sort of be their own, but still live within something that gets them results. So I still agree it should be a yes and. I'm not against
Yeah.
frameworks, by the way.
No, 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 not at all. Even though we weren't allowed to mention the word frameworks in Vegas, but that's another
I
topic.
wasn't gonna say that. I shouldn't have even said that. I didn't know if we were allowed to say that out loud. If you do ever edit it, edit that part out.
That's all right. It's full unedited, so that's fine. What I love about that, Stephen, is I hear this word intention, right? So what is my intention? So what is my intention when I'm working with a sales team? What is my intention when I'm engaging with a chief revenue officer? What is my intention when I'm meeting somebody for the first time? If my intention is pure, then the tactics they supplement the intention. They don't replace the intention.
hmm Mahan Khalsa says it best. Intention matters more than technique, but technique still matters.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you mess up and you came with the right intention, 9 times out of 10, people will give you a second chance. They'll have grace on you because generally people are good.
Mm.
But if you have the wrong intention and you still mess up the technique, or actually, even if you get the technique right, it does seem cringy and it seemed inauthentic.
Yeah.
So that to me is the best way it's ever been said.
Love it. Love it. So you mentioned just before, and I want to bring this to a close. The I think you mentioned childhood. You wanted to touch on something around childhood that
Yeah.
is pertinent for this conversation.
Yeah, and here's part of it. I'm going to explain what happened at a young age that created this chameleon effect in me, but what changed to go from defensive, because a chameleon truly is defensive.
Yeah.
And how did I turn it to be proactive and more offensive and in a
Mm.
positive light? Because I was hiding for the longest time. And here's why. I grew up in a town where I was the only minority in my elementary school, where
Okay.
I was one of the few minorities in junior high and high school. And I'll tell you the moment where things turned. But I remember the first time I realized that I was truly different than everybody else in my class, and it was actually in kindergarten. And my mom had dressed me up one day in traditional Indian clothing and garb, and it looked like robes and things of that nature. Fully innocent. Like, what is she? She's an immigrant mother,
Yeah.
and it's what we had, right? Like,
Yeah.
obviously, I had American clothes and all that, but she was like, "Oh, this is our Indian clothes. Like, why not
Yeah.
send a 5 year old to school? Like, totally innocent, right?"
Yeah.
I get there, everyone's making fun of me. They're like, "Oh, look, you're a girl. That's your dress," and all these different things. And I'm like, and it started to make me hate and resent the Indian culture,
Mm.
because where I would go, I would be made fun of for that identity, right?
Yeah.
And I slowly started to try to be white, be Caucasian, be, like assimilate to the
Mm.
environment. Fast forward, you think about all the racist things that happened through all the bombings and everything like that. When people would find out I'm Indian, they would ask me what tribe.
Yeah.
Like, no, I mean from India, right? Like not actually Native American. And just everywhere I went, I was looked at as everything except what I actually was.
Yeah.
And so it creates this sort of identity crisis. And that's the name of the second book, is Identity Crisis. And I really struggled with that, right? But fast forward to the breaking point in high school, and there's a lot of prayers that I had up till then, but this was, and I'll kind of explain what that was. But I was in high school. I was in a car going to lunch. I was in the middle seat in the back, and I was surrounded. There was two Caucasian females right and left, and one guy that was driving and one guy that was in the passenger seat. I was friends with the friends, and I'm using air quotes, with the person in the front that was
Yeah.
driving. And I say air quotes because of what I'm about to share with you. And I realized, man, this person is not really my friend. We're just all acquaintances.
Yeah.
But the person in the gentleman in the passenger seat did not like the fact that I was friends with his friends. You've ever had people that are like, "Oh, you can't be friends with my friend," and it's like this competition, especially when we're
Yeah.
young, right? So before we take off and move out of the parking spot, he's turning around and he actually says to me, "Man, what are you doing in this car, you?" And then he proceeds to call me the N word, right? And he literally says, "Get this out of the car, and you shouldn't be going with us." And not, and I'm just like fuming in anger. Not one of the other three said anything, defended me. Now
Wow.
you could tell they were mortified.
Yeah.
They did not speak up to defend me. I wanted so badly to deck this guy, but the truth of the matter is, if I had, I probably would have gotten a lot of trouble and things of that
Yeah.
nature. That evening after school, like I went back and I was just in tears, and I was praying a prayer for a long time. And I was just like, and this was the prayer, as I was like, "God, you could have made me anything. Why didn't you make me white?"
Yeah.
And
Wow.
this is truly what happens to a lot of people across the world, is they want to be something that they are not, because they
Yeah.
think they will have an easier life. And so it created a lot of empathy in me, but like I was I had a lot of hate in me. And there's a saying, hurt people.
Yeah.
And when I understood that during that time, because a friend of mine kind of explained that to me, it really dawned on me how for the most part, I had a great childhood, right? I had immigrant parents that provided everything for me, loved me, was always there for me, to, all that kind of stuff.
Mm,
But what was this other person going through that they could have that much hate in their heart that they could turn around and say that to me?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it made me feel sorry for that person.
Mm,
And I shared this last week. So my terminology now is, instead of hurt people, I want hurt people to heal people.
yeah.
Because the only time you can heal people is if you're going through healing or you've been healed yourself. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? You can't be healed unless you've been hurt.
That's it.
So part of this chameleon effect encompasses that as well. That's why I say it's deeper, because you never know who's going through what, which is why I also like no agenda meetings, because it's not about your agenda and you never know what's going to come up. But
No.
from that point, it took some time to really heal and get through that. But that's what actually started the chameleon effect, because what I started to realize is, because I've been mistaken for so many identities,
Mm,
I started trying to belong in all these groups. But the problem was, if I go to the Indian community, I wasn't born in India, but
yeah.
they looked at me as a white person, right? Because
Yeah.
of my diction, I didn't know the language as well as I should, things of that
Yeah.
nature. If I go to the African American community, they looked at me as Indian. If I go to the, Caucasian community, they looked at me as black. So
Mm,
anywhere I was going as a youngster, literally I wasn't truly one of them.
yeah.
So I was trying to adapt all of those skills while they were terrible in, defensive measures as a young kid. As I got to be an adult, they became my superpower.
Yeah.
So if others can figure out all those hurts, all those things they've gone through, if I can help people harness that into their own superpowers
Mm,
and be there for others and be the chameleon that the world desperately needs, you'll probably have a lot less strife, a lot less wars, because it's not about us, a lot less selfishness. And honestly, the sales community would be better off for it,
yeah.
because you know how
Absolutely.
many sellers talk about close one in our process, and they need to be in our sales process instead of the buyer's process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this concept and philosophy will live everywhere, because it's not just a sales principle, it's a life principle, but that just means you can use it everywhere.
100%. Um, Mate, really powerful story. And I would love to talk to you about your other two books in the series, but I think we're going to have another podcast conversation.
No worries.
So hey, thank you so much for sharing that. I love the concept, and I really appreciate the story, because as you were talking about that, I'm picturing myself in those situations and thinking, okay, what would I have done? And I'm not sure that I would have had I guess, the grace and the internal fortitude not to try to punch somebody in the
Yeah.
face. But
Yeah.
looking about, and you're right that every adversity we go through can go one or two ways. It can teach us a lesson that can be used for good, or it can actually teach us a lesson that ends up you've been used for bad. So I'm glad you took the other road. You took the high road. I'm not saying the high road is the better road, the almighty road, but you've chosen to use this as a mechanism to help and to serve. And I really appreciate being on the podcast today, mate. So it's been an absolute pleasure. For people who want to know more about the great man Stephen, who want to stay connected with you and keep getting updates in terms of the progress towards the Chameleon Effect being released, where is the best place for them to do that?
LinkedIn. Double O double M is the last name, En. So it's Stephen with a PH. Um,
Or Stefan, as we
yeah, I
sometimes
know
refer
it's
to.
nobody
Yes.
can pronounce it right, because it's actually it's Stephen, like phonetically PH, but no one else pronounces it like that. So it's Stephen and then Oommen, Oommen. So connect with me on LinkedIn, give me a follow. I'm passionate about changing the world, changing mindsets, and so for me, it's I'm passionate about speaking to audiences. So that's my I think my natural gift to the world, right?
It is. It is. And may you continue to do it for many, many years to come, my friend. So, hey, absolute pleasure. Let's make this part one of maybe two or three part series.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me, Darren.
Awesome, mate. Keep up, keep well. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.